You or someone you know has experienced a toxic workplace.
But like snowflakes, no two toxic workplaces are alike.
That's right. You could have a toxic coworker. You could have a toxic boss. Hell, your whole company could be toxic. So on today's episode, we're giving you the strategies to navigate all the different types of toxic at work. Let's get into it.
Before we get into toxic workplace situations, let's talk about my most toxic trait. I know it's hard to believe given my shiny and glowing personality that I could be toxic, but it's true. I am a complete freak about presentations. Ask anyone I've worked with, I hate to see a poorly designed and formatted deck. In fact, I'll go through and edit my coworkers' presentations behind their back if I think they could look better. I'm not proud of it. But all that's changed now that I have Gamma. I can make a professional presentation in minutes without having to worry at all about formatting. Gamma takes the question mark out of presentation design so I can focus on what really matters at work. Want to check Gamma out? Go to gamma.app/PMLE to start using Gamma for free. That's GAMMA.app/PMLE. Now, back to the show. So Kyle, have you ever worked in a toxic workplace?
Yeah.
Is it
Looking
this?
at one right now.
Why the toxic?
Yep. I was wondering why you wanted to do this episode. Is there something you need to tell me?
Yes, I am toxic. That's what it is.
I've seen some toxic things.
Uh-huh.
I wouldn't say I've worked at a toxic workplace.
Okay.
Like I wouldn't classify the entire organization as toxic, but yeah, I've seen some things.
You've seen some things.
I've seen some things.
Well, what does toxic mean to you?
It's a good question. We probably should define toxic.
Mm-hmm.
It's this feeling of almost like half gaslighting where you're like, is this actually happening?
Yeah.
I can't imagine it's like this bad. It almost is like shocking how weird things can be. I would say it's overly political workplace where you're not actually getting rewarded based on work or merit, but on weird personal relationships. And I think there's a sense of dread coming to work that like it just feels bad.
Yeah.
And it's very draining. That's how I would define it.
Yep.
It's a pretty ephemeral word, I think. How would you define toxic at the workplace?
Well, yeah. So I think this is something we've talked about in the past, but I think it's worth saying again, which is like when you overuse a term as a population, it loses its
Yeah,
meaning.
thanks, Britney Spears.
Thanks.
Yeah.
She started this. But I think with the context of workplace, I think toxic can be very overused and it can kind of like remove some of the bite to the reality of actually toxic workplaces. So iHire, which is, I don't know, a company, did a survey and they defined toxic workplaces in a way that I really liked. I hadn't seen it defined this way elsewhere. So they called it, quote, a work environment characterized by harmful behaviors, attitudes, and practices that impact well-being, morale, and productivity. So it impacts not only your mental health and maybe your physical health, but also your ability to get the job done.
Yeah.
Which I think is really important because I too have been in workplaces, scenarios that I would view as toxic, but I didn't really because we had defined toxic, like when you're talking about, oh, I got a toxic coworker, oh, whatever. It's just like a coworker you kind of don't like.
Yeah.
And
like
so,
I have a toxic boss that told me to do something today.
Right. And
that's
it's like,
your boss.
Oh, that's kind of their job. Mm-hmm. And so I think like we should reserve that framing. And I want to spend the rest of this episode talking about the truly toxic environments and how to kind of rectify those.
Yeah.
Without being like, sometimes I get a mean passive-aggressive slack from the marketer on the team, like whatever.
All right, but no marketers at Morning Brew were affected by that comment.
That was not. That was fully made up. I just came up with a random idea.
I love this definition, and I love that you made me give a terrible definition off the top of my head and then hit me with a
I was curious what your thoughts were
defined definition.
That was kind of toxic of me, wasn't it?
That was very toxic of you. So let me set the scene with some stats here, and then let's get into the different types of toxic scenarios. So SHRM, in a 2022 study, found that 1 in 4 people dreaded going to work, which to me, 25% of people across the country dread going to work. Toxic, that feels like it's a problem. And then MIT Sloan Management did this really interesting study, and they found that a toxic culture is 10.4 times more powerful than just compensation in predicting a company's attrition rate compared to industry peers. So a toxic culture, 10.4 times more powerful than just paying people more than the compensation in figuring out attrition rates. So toxic culture is causing people to leave their jobs much more than just not paying them what they think they need to be paid. Yep. So this is a massive problem. It hits a lot of people, and it affects people leaving their jobs more than I think what we normally think are the major factors. So massive problem. Like we said up top, different ways toxicity can hit you in the workplace. So let's start with toxic coworkers.
Yeah, so there's three scenarios that I think many people face. The first is toxic coworkers. The second is a toxic boss. And the third is toxic workplace environment. But there's a secret fourth thing that we'll get into later.
Ooh, okay.
Very exciting.
Let's start with toxic coworkers.
Yes. So I think this is basically just like a person with bad vibes that you have to work with. Like, again, something that we didn't mention at the top that I think is very important is like, we're talking toxic just short of illegal, right? Like, illegal stuff, completely different. If you're getting harassed, like if you're being asked to do stuff that is clearly illegal, this is different.
There's already a word for that. It's illegal.
It's illegal, right? Toxic is like maybe right up against that line.
Toxic is you wish it was illegal.
So that you could call the cops, whatever. But, you know, I think that that's also an important caveat. We're not telling people that are being sexually harassed to like just have a difficult conversation. You know, like that's completely separate. But when we're talking about a toxic coworker, this is somebody who you dread working with, who could have like really bad attitude, who could, you know, delay you getting your job done. Maybe they could be, intentionally obtuse or devil's advocate-y.
Yep.
So that being said, this person, I think, is probably not your problem to solve.
Okay.
But you should protect yourself and or handle it by telling somebody else.
Yeah, I had on my strategies on dealing with a toxic coworker. The first is get a beer or a coffee or a tea.
With them or by yourself?
By yourself and wish you weren't in this scenario. No, with them.
Oh.
I think there's been scenarios where I've had a difficult relationship with people, I feel like, and then I just got to know them better and we became more friendly. And then the like things I was perceiving as toxic kind of went away, or I understood them more, and we were able to have a really effective working relationship. So I think don't be quick to judge and label this person toxic and then carry that label with them the rest of your working relationship. Try to get to know them. Sometimes it is like you just got to have a personal relationship with people. If that doesn't work, I think this is the least problematic of the toxic things we will go down, because if you can avoid them, that's the plan. Like if they're a toxic coworker, but they work in a different department, you don't have to work with them that much. They're not a bottleneck to your work. Just like stop talking to them, stay out of their way, and continue on your path and do a great job. If you do have to work with them, I think that is where you get to this point where you have to decide, I'm just going to think this person is toxic and have a terrible time myself and like hate working with this person, or I'm going to try to have a difficult conversation with him, which is really hard to do with a person you think is toxic because they're not the most self-aware of the bunch. So that could be really challenging. I would try to have a difficult conversation. If that doesn't change anything and there are a bottleneck to your work, I think you escalate and you bring it to your boss and you lay out like, these are all the things I'm trying. Here's how it's impacting my work. What do you think we do about it? And hopefully if you have a good boss and you have a good company culture, there will be a way to resolve that issue, either with a talking to from HR or a dismissal of that person if it is really a wide shared belief across the organization that they are toxic. How do you think about those strategies?
Well, I like those, and I think like I'm kind of thinking through examples in my head now. Like, how would you manage a toxic? Because it feels like you're talking about like maybe potentially toxic relationships. Like this is somebody that you just don't get along with. What happens when that's the case and this person is like very high achieving in the company? Like, how do you manage knowing that even if you do bring it to your boss, they're probably not going to address it because they don't want to impact that person?
It's a great point. I think if they're very high achieving, the viewpoint of the company is probably like let's be honest, if you're high achieving, you can get away with a lot of shit. Like, unfortunately, you have a longer leash. So if they're super high achieving and a little bit toxic, like you can have a conversation with them, you could bring it to your boss. They're not going to get rid of the person. So unless you can establish a good working relationship with that person, like you're probably just going to have to deal with it, unfortunately. However, there are some interesting stats because this is a very common refrain. Like, do you hire the toxic like superstar? And I was doing research ahead of time and people found that, let me find this. Okay, here we go. HBR studied 11 global companies and where 1 in 20 people were fired for being toxic. And they wanted to answer this question that you posed to me, which is great. We actually didn't plan this.
Yeah, we did not.
Well, thanks for the layup. They said that avoiding a toxic worker altogether saved the company on average $12,500. And dealing with a top 1% superstar added $5,300 to the bottom line. So avoiding a toxic worker, even if they're fantastic, actually was net beneficial to the bottom line on a per year basis because you understand that, like, yes, you have a superstar that's, toxic, performing very well. But oftentimes, if they're a superstar, they're dealing with a lot of other people at the company and they're hurting all of those people and hurting productivity from all of those people. And so I do think as a company, you have to draw the line somewhere and say, like, even if you're God's gift to earth at engineering, like, you're affecting everyone else. And there are studies that suggest, according to HBR, that it's actually better just to avoid a toxic worker point blank, no matter how good they are.
Yeah, and I really love that. And I'm actually surprised. I feel like 12.5K is pretty low. But
this was in this study hourly workers.
Oh.
So I want to caveat that.
Okay.
I would focus less on the actual numbers, more on that delta where avoiding a toxic worker is 2x more beneficial than hiring a toxic superstar.
Yeah, that makes sense. Love that. I agree. And I think like it's so funny because I worked at a company once that had a no asshole policy. And one of the reasons why many people left that company was because of a high achieving asshole.
Yep.
And so I think it's like really, really important if you're going to outline that and like have that be a policy at your company to like make sure you follow through. But yeah, I think like I've worked at a place that had a coworker with just like rancid vibes.
Yeah.
Just like absolutely
like
vile.
They get on like the Google Meet and you're just like, oh.
Yeah, like rancid. And so I like one of the things that I tried to do, and this is just kind of going through the process of like, how could you actually handle a toxic coworker? A lot of people really liked them. And so I was like, okay, I just have to handle this. Like, I'll try and kind of push back when they're exceptionally putrid, like disgusting. And like, I can just like handle this. And then what the aha moment for me was when I was able to kind of protect myself a little bit from having to deal with like them being rude and annoying to handle. But then it was starting to like, because I was putting those boundaries on, it was like bouncing back and like hitting other people.
Yeah.
And so that's when I was like, okay, I've created this bubble of protection for myself, but like now like other people are getting impacted because of that. I need to escalate.
Yeah.
And so I ended up escalating. Like, hey, this person's kind of an asshole. And it wasn't just kind of an asshole. They were actually quite rancid is really accurate. And it was handled, but it's just like, when you feel like you have a coworker that is high performing that everybody likes, sometimes people just don't see what they're doing, like in one-on-ones or in the water cooler, area. Like, so it is up to you to escalate and at least give them that chance to rectify it.
Yep.
Either the individual or management.
I think it's a great advice. And the final thing I'll say about a toxic coworker is I've been in scenarios where you're dealing with someone that you perceive to be pretty high achieving and they maybe rub you the wrong way. You're like, is this person an asshole? Like maybe they're kind of toxic, but I think you think because they're high achieving, you're like, no, there's no way. Like maybe I'm misinterpreting the scenario. And then you talk to other people and you're like, oh no, this is actually a problem across the entire org. And that is where I think leadership is in a difficult spot. They can't typically like really understand how one person is affecting so many different people unless they're having like explicit conversations about it with a lot of people. So I would say if you are witnessing it and I think you're like put up a shield ideas interesting and then you see it bounce off other people, I do think like documenting those cases. Again, this isn't about like they didn't slack me right back, I'm going to go to HR. But if they're seriously toxic, I think documentation is only going to protect you and them theoretically. And documenting how that affects other people and then going to your boss or HR is the best path forward.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you're totally right. Like the management and your boss doesn't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And like, if everyone is feeling that way and they're just like not saying it because like, well, he's the top blah, 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 then they're never going to know. And then you're going to feel resentful. And I think that while, as Kyle outlined, like the toxic coworker is probably the easiest of the toxic situations to handle, it doesn't mean that it's not still like frustrating or bad, and it can cause people to leave.
Yeah.
And so I think focusing in on like what you can control in that one-on-one relationship with that coworker, but then also like keep an eye out to see if that's impacting other people, because even if you've created that shield, like you could be causing somebody else to leave.
Yep.
Because you're not addressing your relationship with that toxic coworker.
It's a great point. The last thing I will say is a Journal of Applied Psychology in 2016 studied this like toxic coworker, and they actually found that rudeness is very similar, contagious to a cold. Like,
no.
Yeah. So like if you're around a lot of toxic people, it's hard to be positive. We've all been there. And so I do think that we're saying this is the easiest one to avoid, but if you have to work with someone that's toxic every day, it's really hard to stay positive. And so I don't want to downplay that this is like easy to get around. And I thought that was really interesting. Like you kind of do take on the mentality of the people you're around. And so also look out for yourself. If you're around toxic people all day, like it is probably affecting your psyche as well.
Yeah. And we'll be right back after this. Okay, back to the show.
Should we move on to toxic bosses? Because I think this one gets a little harder.
Yeah.
So SHRM also, that same study I mentioned in 2022, looked at toxic bosses. They said 58% of people who quit due to workplace culture say that their manager is ultimately the reason they left. And this feels like no surprise to me.
Yeah.
We've said this before. I think people tend to join for a company and they leave because of their manager. This is the most intimate relationship you're going to have at your company. And it's a big deal. They found $44.6 billion in associated turnover costs per year due to toxic workplace culture. So this is something that affects the bottom line.
Yep.
It obviously affects employees. Probably the most difficult to navigate. How do you deal with a toxic boss, Kaila?
Yeah, there's a few things you can do. First, like have a beer.
Have a beer.
But by yourself maybe, and maybe a few. No, because think about the relationship that you have with your coworker versus the relationship you have with your boss. You can kind of avoid a toxic coworker. You cannot avoid a toxic boss. And so we'll define toxic boss, like thinking of some examples, like this could be somebody that doesn't care. It could be, this could be a boss that doesn't care about you, that doesn't care about the job. And therefore, like they have no vested interest in giving you feedback and giving you assignments, in advocating for you up, or in the company. This could be somebody who's micromanaging and someone who doesn't trust you. And therefore they're like all over your ass, somebody who plays favorites, who clearly favors other employees over you, somebody who is actively encouraging intra-team fighting. I know somebody who starts every meeting with, "So who's the problem?" Which feels a little toxic. Or somebody who's a workaholic and has expectations of you that you're working at all times as well. These are just like top of mind, top of the head things. Like there are so many different ways that a boss can be toxic, and that really does impact your career growth. This is a much larger problem because in order to address it, yes, you can have a direct conversation with them, but it could be, especially if they're toxic, it could be very, very challenging to go to HR or to do a skip level and talk to their manager. Yeah. That could have really negative ramifications for you if it doesn't go the way you want it to. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, my recommendation, as I'm sure your recommendation is going to be, is have a hard conversation with your boss, see if that rectifies things, and document everything, and then make the decision if you want to go up a level. Yeah,
you're spot on, and I think, we could be like, oh, have a difficult conversation and document everything and then go to HR and then they'll fix it. Let's be real. That's probably not going to happen.
Right.
This is the hardest scenario to deal with. Mm-hmm. I think that your boss or your direct manager has the biggest impact on your career compared to anyone else. And if you can't even get a neutral boss, I think you start looking. Mm-hmm. Like a good boss, a great boss is going to take you in your career to places you want to go.
Yep.
And I don't think anyone, period, should have to suffer a toxic boss, because not only is it going to destroy your mental health it's going to destroy your career. And so if you can, granted, there might be a ton of reasons why you have to stay in your workplace, and like, God bless you. And, you know, we hope that comes to a nice resolution. If you can get out, like, you got to get out. And I think particularly with this term toxic, if you have identified this person is toxic, it's not a difficult conversation. It's not a misunderstanding. You've tried everything. I don't think toxic people change.
Yep.
And so if you're wishing that this toxic boss is one day going to wake up and see the light, they're not going to. And you need to try to get a boss in a new situation as fast as humanly possible. And I really do believe that.
Yep.
This is a hard one to fix. And all the energy you spend fixing it could be spent finding a better boss at a better job. And I would deploy all your time and resources in that direction. I also think there is a health consequence to this that is maybe a little understated. We talked about this dread at work earlier. And even, you know, like a coworker comes on a Google Meet, or you have a meeting with a coworker and they're bad vibes. They're toxic. Like, you leave that scenario like so stressed and so like caught up. And with a coworker, maybe you only have one meeting a week with them.
Right.
A boss you're going to be talking to all the time. It is not healthy to feel that constantly for months and months and months and months. The Swedish researchers at the Stress Institute studied 3,100 men over 10 years. They found people that were in a constant, stressful, toxic situation at their company and with their boss, 60% more likely to have suffered a stroke, heart attack, or other life-threatening cardiac condition.
Wow.
Like, this does actually have impacts on you. Yeah. I'm not going to say you have a toxic boss, you're going to drop dead from a heart attack tomorrow, but exposure to that over a long period of time, like, you don't deserve that. Get out.
Yeah. And I think there's one other note. I completely agree with everything that you said. And it's kind of weird. I feel like that's like kind of my advice usually. And you're usually like, just try to make it work.
Yeah. But it's not worth it in this case.
It's not worth it. It's true. And this is after, obviously, you've tried to make it work. You've confirmed, like, the behaviors are not going to change because this person is like stuck in their ways, or the reasoning behind it is incorrect.
Yeah.
Or, you know,
or like, you're communicating wrong. Like, do all the normal managing up stuff. Like, understand what their objectives are and talk to them about how they like to be communicated and express how you like to be communicated with. Like, do all that normal stuff. But at some point, you just realize it ain't going to change.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think that these are all really great pieces of advice. If you can get out, get out. I think this doesn't have to be like quitting your job immediately. It could be like starting to network internally. If you really like the company, but it's really truly just your boss that's toxic, you know, you're probably not the only person that thinks that. So maybe you start talking to people that are their peers, not like, you know, talking shit, spreading gossip, but being like, I'm really interested in working with you. I would love to take on a project. Starting to test those waters, starting to build mentorship relationships with people that are not your direct boss. Even if you are not able to get under that or to get out from under that person, at least now you have other advocates outside of them. And then, you know, you can slowly start making your way over there without having to quit your job. Especially now, if, you know, economic stability is something that you're trying to prioritize, it becomes a little bit harder. So do things that you can to remove some of the reliance on that boss.
I think that's great advice. And also, if you can, get a different boss.
Yeah.
Like, in some cases, you might be able to advocate to like move to someone else, whether that's changing the scope of the work you're doing or articulating how you'll drive more impact if you are managed by someone else. Like, that's all fair, and you should try to do that. And if it is really just an isolated boss and the rest of the company is great, moving can solve a lot of problems. Also, if your boss has multiple direct reports, I like your point about just talk to them. And maybe it's like, hey, tell me if I'm crazy here, but like, this guy sucks, right? What's going on here? And if they all feel the same way, you could have a little more power if you come as a package to HR and like, hey, we've tried everything. Here's what's going on. Here's the documentation. Like, this person needs to be removed. Again, you're playing with fire there a bit, and it might be better for you to just get out yourself. But if this is a wide felt problem, the company may take care of it in an appropriate way.
Right. And, you know, if you think, let's say it's like a 5-person team and one toxic boss, and all 5 people agree that this is like, all 5 people are looking or are pissed. Like, productivity is going down. It's better for the company if they don't have that toxic manager, or if that manager is managed away from that team. Maybe it's just a bad fit. Although, again, when we're talking about true toxicity, it's probably just like fucked vibes, you know? One thing I'd like to note though, and again, it's very shocking. I feel like we're doing a little twist here of
Freaky Friday.
Freaky Friday. A toxic boss is not somebody that is hard on you necessarily.
No.
Like if somebody is really hard on you, that doesn't mean that they're toxic. That could mean that they have really high expectations. That could mean that they have high expectations for you. Did I say that twice? Maybe.
That's how high our expectations are.
It's just so important. But like I've had bosses before that were really, really hard on me and had very high expectations. And like I did not love that in the moment. And afterwards was very appreciative of some of the stuff that they did to make sure that, you know, they were really kind of on my ass, checking that I was doing things that helped me have a better attention to detail. I didn't like let projects drop as much. Now, was I pumped working in that environment? No. But I do feel like I would not label my boss as toxic.
Yeah. I think it's a good call out. Like we've talked about the severity of this word up top and how if you deploy it to every single person you've ever known, like it starts losing meaning.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great call out. Let's move to the third category, which is the toxic company. So it's not a coworker. It's not your boss. It's just kind of the vibe of the organization. Yeah. How would you approach a toxic company?
This is bad. Get out. I mean, this is bad. It's very hard to get out of. It's not like you can like have a difficult conversation your way out of this, you know, like you can't. So an example of a toxic workplace environment that came to mind kind of immediately when thinking about this is Wells Fargo. So in 2016, Wells Fargo was found to be incentivizing the sales team to open basically they were incentivizing opening accounts. That was like the metric that they were trying to drive. And so they kind of turned the sales practice into one that became fraudulent. So 2 million accounts were opened without customer authorization. This means that the salespeople working at the Wells Fargo team were basically incentivized to do fraud. And when you're working in that environment, you can't just be like, guys, have we considered not being toxic? You know, like that. You got to get out. You have to leave, unless it's like, and that one is illegal. So you should probably whistleblow. But like, it's really, really, really hard to get out when it's from the top.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of stuck. Like, there's the famous quote, like, "This is water. It's the water that you're swimming in." If everything is toxic, like, where are you going to go? You swim to another fish. You get a different boss. If the whole culture sucks, then, you know, too bad, so sad. You do want to exit. I will say, like, I think there's pockets where if you're working at a really large organization, it's hard for me to say like, oh, the entire organization is toxic. Like, let's take Google for an example. There's like, 18 billion employees that work at Google. I would never be like, yeah, all of Google is toxic. And I don't know Google at all. But to me, like at that scale, there's so many different teams and subdivisions and sub-teams and sub-departments that really you could almost isolate, like your team is really good and you feel like there's like crazy stuff going on at some other team that's toxic. But I think if you can isolate to your team and you really like your boss, you really like your coworkers, and the rest of the company is like a so-so vibe, I think it's worth staying, like, you know, based on what you're trying to optimize for. So that would be my only advice here is really understand, like, is it a problem that like things that aren't affecting me at the company are toxic? Or can I just isolate myself to this team that I really, really like? So there is some maybe nuance there, but I agree. Like if the whole place sucks, then that's a tough spot to be.
Yeah, and I think this is another like interesting. I really like the pockets that you're highlighting. Like, can you find a pocket of non-toxicity?
Yeah,
whatever.
A little sweet spot in the water.
Spot.
Yeah.
But I also think what's really interesting is a lot of companies have kind of gotten away with being toxic or employing toxic practices because they're considered prestigious or they're considered, you know, they're high paying, they're high revenue. They can kind of get away with it a little more. It's like, I'm thinking, for example, of the finance industry, right? They're for decades, if not centuries, it's been like, yeah, it sucks. Everyone knows it sucks. It's toxic. Like, it's super political. You can't get ahead unless you're pulling somebody down, you know? But you're going to get paid so much money, so many figures, 6, maybe 7. And, you know, you just suck it up for a few years and then you get to like go retire and like work on a farm or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I think that companies I think that's less accepted now. I think, especially with Gen Z, and this is something we talked about in our Gen Z episode with Macy, especially Gen Z is less willing to accept that those like vibes, those standards, because, you know, they're more focused on their mental health and their long-term well-being. So I think that's kind of interesting. It's like, yes, there are some toxic companies, and yes, you can find pockets, and like, yes, maybe it's generally bad, but also people are willing to endure that in order to have a good name on your resume, get a lot of money, like get a cushy job later.
Yeah. I think this is actually a great point, and I would say it's a different scenario if you go into a company and it was like sold as this like really great place to work, and then you find out, oh, it's not, it's super toxic. I think finance, no one has gone into, you know, Goldman being like, heard the culture here is like, I'm not going to work hard. It's you know, like, you kind of know what you're getting into. And I have like a little less empathy for that. Obviously, anything illegal, bad. Yeah. But there are trade-offs. Like, okay, I'm going to kind of endure some like toxic shit, but I'm getting paid a ton. This is going to help my career. And you know what you're getting into ahead of time. I'm not saying don't do that. I think there's a lot of people who make a very self-rational decision to go into an industry like that because in their mind, the pros outweigh the cons. I think that's fine. And so I think for the company level, it is about thinking, what am I optimizing for? What are the pros of working here? Do I like my team? And then what are the cons? And really doing that balancing where I do think you could net out, I'm going to stay. Yeah. With the toxic boss, on the other hand, I just don't think there's anything you can really put in the pro column that's going to outweigh like a terrible boss. Unless, I mean, if they're gonna back the dump truck up to me and like pay me like $1 billion a year, then like, okay,
you could be as
keep
toxic
it coming,
as you want.
But that's not really realistic. So
one tactic there is if you go back to the rate my job template episode, let's include toxicity as one of your factors, you know, and like see how that, if everything else is great, but it's like really toxic, it'll show up in your score. Yeah, that's a great call out.
Okay, Kayla, we've covered toxic coworkers. We've covered toxic bosses. We've covered toxic companies. I think that's it. Wait. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. Let's talk if you're toxic. So what if it's you?
Yeah, this is very like, it's not you, it's me. Yeah. This is the last thing that I think is really important, which is sometimes truly everyone around you is toxic. Everything around you is toxic and you're in a really bad situation. And sometimes you might be the problem. If you're perceiving everything as toxic when it's maybe fine, that's when you need to look inward and be like, okay, every boss I've had has been toxic. Every job I've been to has been toxic. Like, is that true? Should I change how I'm evaluating a company? Or is my perception of what is and isn't toxic a little skewed? Yeah. And so I think there's been times for sure when I've been, you know, in this shit, like I've been like dying and I'm like, this sucks. This is toxic. And there's been times where I'm like, I have the greatest boss. Like I'm doing awesome work. I'm really loving the company I'm working for. And when that turns, I'm like, shoot, is it the same person that's toxic or is it my perception of the relationship that's turned toxic? And is it a me problem? And I think before you go through any of the tactics that we've given for coworker, boss, or environment, just do a little check. It's probably toxic, right? Especially if it's as bad as we're, but there's a chance.
And if you're listening to this podcast, you're cool as hell. Yeah. And you're not toxic, but for the other people out there.
Right, everyone else. Send this to your work enemy.
Yes.
And have them do some self-reflection. But I think it's just good to check, right? Yeah. And like, this is something that you've said in the past, like Kat Cole has said this, like when you first receive a piece of feedback, always assume it's correct. Yeah. It's like kind of like if you're receiving, like if you're getting this information that this is toxic, you're feeling like it's toxic, just check real quick, is this me? And if it's not, then continue on.
And maybe it's not fully you, but you might end up contributing to it. And I think that going back to this whole like rudeness is contagious, toxicity is contagious. I think it's really easy to start with good intentions and be a good person and then be surrounded by toxicity. And then you start kind of modeling the behaviors that you're seeing around you.
Yep.
And actually are contributing to the problem as well. And I think at that point, you do have to ask, like, is this the path I want to go down? Or like, is it time for me to move on? Because I know I'm better than this. Like, I don't want to be stuck in this environment. So I do think we all, myself included, have a toxicity blind spot where we're never going to assume we're the problem. But it does require a little self-awareness to make sure, like, okay, I may be contributing 1% to this.
Yeah.
What's my 1% is a good question to ask yourself. And like, what can I be doing different? And I do think like once a lot of people start modeling this toxic behavior, it gets really hard to stop. And that's where it can snowball to affect the entire company. SHRM did another study where they said that 52% of people have observed inappropriate behavior at work. But of those that observe it, only 58% report it. And so I do think that there's this like hesitancy to like do something about it that's kind of underscored our entire conversation, and it is really difficult. So I think if you're going to be in a toxic environment, you either have to do something about it, which is difficult and hard and scary, or I think it will kind of like eat away at you and you'll start becoming a little more toxic yourself. And at that point, you need to eject yourself, go find a better work situation. You deserve it, and things will get a lot better.
Well, on that happy note, should we roll the credits?
Let's roll the credits. Our producer is Michaela Heck.
Our technical director is Lonnie Fiskus.
Amanda Yamaguchi is our senior director of account operations.
And our president is Devin Emery.
This show is a production of Morning Brew.
Thanks for listening, and we'll be less toxic next week.
No more toxic workplaces.